Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Dead Man Walking Podcast. I'm your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is out now and I believe is an Amazon bestseller. And you better buy one before they run out of stock. So, why am I repeatedly dead, Fred? Because that's exactly what happened to me. So, I was repeatedly dead a lot of times. So today I am happy to have Yvonne deSousa with us. Yvonne has a story of overcoming adversity and getting a few laughs in while she's doing it. And she also has a book out and another one coming out through our common publisher. So Yvonne, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on.
Hi, Fred. Thank you. It's great to see you up and walking. That's wonderful.
Thanks.
um,
So,
so I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2009, the week before Christmas. I got the news while I was at work on a busy day, as you're getting ready for the holidays in general. And
mhm.
my doctor told me that I had to go to a hospital. I live on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and that I had to go to a hospital in Boston, Mass, immediately. And my first thought was, I can't go anywhere. Christmas is next week. I have too much to do. And then my next thought was, how am I going to drive to Boston? I'm terrified of going over the bridge, pretty much.
Mhm.
So I had a little brother who was in school, it just over the bridge, and I called him and I said, "Is there any way you can meet me? I just got this horrible news, and I have to go to a Boston hospital." And he said, "Sure." He was done with finals, so I met him. And just for context, this little brother of mine was about 22, and he was a semi-pro dirt bike rider, and he drove a huge Ford 150 pickup truck with dirt bikes in the bed of the truck. Always, that's when you saw the
Mhm.
truck, you saw the dirt bikes. So we get to the hospital and I get the news and I'm totally overwhelmed. And thankfully, I didn't have to stay in the hospital. But as we're walking out, and my life has just been totally upended. And he says to me, you can totally get one of those handicap parking plates now. And
Mhm.
I was just like, what are you talking about? I just got this amazing, like horrible news, and Christmas is next week, and I'm overwhelmed, and you're talking about parking. And he said, seriously, if you don't want to use it right away, you can let me borrow it. And I pictured his huge truck with the dirt bikes in the bed backing into a handicap parking space. And I just cracked up, and it felt good. I
Mhm.
felt overwhelmed and exhausted and terrified and all these horrible emotions. But for those few seconds, I felt really good. And then as the day went on, as I got home, I wound up getting, it's 1 week before the holidays, and I have one piece of mail. It's not Christmas cards, it's not bills, it's a solicitation from the National MS Society, which was just too like ironic to be believed. And I cracked
Mhm.
up again. And before I knew it, I started writing these things down, and it really helped. It didn't take away the overwhelming emotions, but it just seemed like everything about the diagnosis was so overwhelming, but bizarre in being overwhelming. Like,
Mhm.
for example, my insurance company had someone call me who said she was now an advocate to help me with the trauma of chronic illness. And she would do
Mhm.
whatever she can to help me on the path. That same week, my insurance increased the payment of my medications to like thousands of dollars, which
Mhm.
I couldn't pay. So I called her to talk about it. And she said, "Oh, I'm not here to help you with that." I said, "Really? You're from my insurance company?" She said, "No, I'm here to help you with the trauma of dealing with a chronic illness." And I said, "Well, my trauma is that I can't pay for medication I need to help with the chronic illness." "Oh, no, but I don't deal with that," she said. So I just was so overwhelmed, and everything just seemed so bizarre that laughing was the only thing I could do. And it's thankful that I did, because I really think in my mind, being able to laugh at what was so bizarre helped with dealing with the illness. And so I started to write these things down.
Hmm. So this all started in 2008, you said?
2009.
2009. So what was going on before 2009 that you knew something was wrong, you didn't know exactly what it was, and so you went to a doctor and said something's wrong, I'm not sure what.
Well, what happened was that was I had turned 40 that year. So I would get together
Mm-hmm.
with my girlfriends and we'd all lament, our aging things, and they'd say, "Oh, it's just
Mm-hmm.
aging." And I was exhausted all the time. I would get this weird stomach ache that was like a
Hmm.
twisting of my abdomen. And I'm known to be a junk food junkie. And so I would joke that it only happened when I ate something healthy. So that was, my thought on that. The thing that was most concerning was I had my grandmother and my uncle both had Alzheimer's, and my
Hmm.
cognitive stuff was just getting very, very scary. And what was the
Yeah.
most scary was I lost my ability to correct mistakes. We all make mistakes, but what would
Hmm.
happen is my brain would recognize the mistake as valid, so I couldn't correct myself. And then, the thing you attribute to aging, I mean, I was getting up a million times in the night to go to the bathroom, and oh, that's aging, your bladder gets weaker, blah, blah, blah. But that fall of 2009, my feet started getting this weird numbing and tingling feeling. And
Hmm.
within 1 week, that feeling moved slowly up my legs to my abdomen. And that's when I was like, oh, something's really going on. And I went to the doctor and we did the test. I had to have a muscle test to test how my muscles were doing. And they sent me to this gorgeous Czechoslovakian doctor who basically told me to undress and then electrocuted my muscles to see what they were supposed to do, if they did what they were supposed to. Um, and I was relatively luckier than most because it takes a long time to get an MS diagnosis, but I got mine. It was like the final thing was the MRI, and my MRI was so obvious. It was like multiple sclerosis was written across my brain. I mean, it was that
Hmm.
obvious. So
So did you end up dating the Czechoslovakian
I
doctor?
did
Or?
not. He was not
Oh,
interested. Apparently, seeing me in that little paper sheet thing didn't, do anything for him.
yeah. Oh,
So,
not
unfortunately,
fair.
I
Not
know,
fair.
right? Right. So I started writing this stuff down, and soon it led to a book called MS Madness: A Giggle More, Cry Less Story of Multiple Sclerosis,
Hmm.
which I'm proud to say it gets fabulous reviews on Amazon.
Hmm.
I self-published it, so it's not a bestseller. What I learned on the self-publishing journey is that it helps to have a publisher behind you. It adds clout. So
For
when
sure.
I wrote my next book, which ironically is not about multiple sclerosis, I was lucky to do some research and be accepted by our mutual publisher, Black Rose Writing. So I'm very
Hmm.
excited to be working with them. But so I did self-publish my book, and it is getting fabulous reviews. But it wasn't enough, and the experts told me in order to promote it, I needed to start a blog to get more of an audience. And I
Hmm.
thought, well, what am I going to write about in a blog? Like that's just I have no idea. Well, luckily or unluckily for me, MS gives you a lot of crazy in your life, a lot of bizarro circumstances. So before
Hmm.
I knew it, I had a lot to write about. And then a few years later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I survived that too,
Oh,
thankfully.
this is just hilarious. You are
And,
so
well,
funny.
it is hilarious to be on it. Well, I mean, there was a lot that was not funny, and I'm
Hmm.
not trying to suggest that you can laugh the seriousness off.
Hmm.
Um, Crying is very valid too. When in my diagnosis, the Kleenex stock was raised considerably because I cried a
Hmm.
lot, but the laughing helped. So I had to have a bilateral mastectomy, and some friends threw me a goodbye to your boobs party, complete with
Okay,
a
that
boob
is
cake.
funny.
Yes, complete with a boob cake. And I wound up getting some funny blogs out of it, like goodbye to the doomed hugs from the doomed jugs was one of my
Hmm.
breast cancer blogs. So I know it sounds bizarre, but it really does help. It feels like I'm fighting back in some way when I can make
Hmm.
fun of that stuff. And I'm not trying to say that I don't want your listeners to be upset. I'm not trying to say that laughing away makes you like survive incredibly and laughs all this stuff away. I've been fortunate that I have survived the breast cancer and my MS is stable. And I think laughing helps, but of course, it's not the end all and be all, and you need the medical help, and of course. But I just think the humor is good for you. And as it turns out, there's some research to support that. So
Are you perhaps going to tell us some of this research?
I would like to, sure.
Okay.
So we all have something in our bodies called cortisol, and cortisol is
Hmm.
very, very bad. So it does a lot of bad things. It increases fatigue, irritability, headaches, anxiety, depression, intestinal problems, blood pressure, muscle pain, poor sleep, weight gain. which, is my favorite because I can say, oh, I have too much more cortisol. Not that I'm still eating too many junk foods. I have too much cortisol in my body, but it's bad. And so, and we all know, our science tells us cortisol is called the stress hormone. And we all know that stress is horrible for you. When you laugh, you're releasing endorphins, and endorphins fight cortisol. So, when you go to the doctor and they'll say, ways to get rid of stress, and there'll be a list of, meditation, religion, yoga, eat healthy, get good sleep. All of those things are really good. And they all also help fight cortisol, but so do laughing, because laughing produces endorphins that also attack cortisol. So when you can laugh, it's good for you, and it can help lower your pain. It can help improve anxiety. It can help protect your blood vessels. It can lower inflammation. It can reduce stress. It can overall support a healthy immune system. And science is just starting to recognize that. And what I'd like to see someday is that list of things you can do to de-stress, and have laughing included on that list. But we'll see. I don't think we're quite there yet, but
yeah, I've had some coaches and doctors come on the podcast about burnout and everything. I don't recall any of them ever talking about laughter and joy. It's about the meditation, it's about getting your food right and stuff you've mentioned. So it should definitely be on the list.
Absolutely. And that's what I discovered organically. But I have yet to see it either. Although little by little, I think it's starting to be recognized. It started back when, I believe, in like the 1960s with Norman Cousins. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was diagnosed with a chronic illness, a very painful one. And his outlook did not look good. They did not predict that he would survive it. And he just threw everything to the wind and said, if I'm going to go, I want to be, enjoy my last few days. So he checked himself into a hotel and just put on like funny videos, and just laugh for 2 weeks, or maybe not 2 weeks, maybe like say 5 days, something like that. And his next doctor appointment, he had shown like considerable improvement, and they had no idea what caused that improvement. So science is looking into this more. And the one thing they have learned is that, it releases endorphins, stimulate, laughing stimulates the productions of endorphins, and endorphins help decrease cortisol. So that's the basic science behind that.
So have you always been a funny person?
I think I was, but I'm not not joke teller or stand up or anything like that. But I discovered once I was diagnosed with MS that I could write funny. And so I had no idea. So
was anyone else in the family funny?
Well, we're Portuguese, and Portuguese people tend to be good storytellers. So I had a lot of good storytellers in my family, and that kind of lends to, the humor aspect, because we're very lively. And at least in my family, the good stories come with a lot of exaggeration, so that helps. Like, for example, my dad fell off a scaffolding once, and it was very scary and very serious, and he survived. But every time he told the story, the height of the scaffolding went up like 20 feet. So in his survival story, we were good storytellers, and we used exaggeration, which I tend to do. And I try to do it to the point of exaggeration so obvious that I'm exaggerating, but it's amusing in the meantime.
So you just gave me an idea for my next book. Instead of The Summer I Died 20 Times, it's The Summer I Died 60 Times.
Sounds good.
And then after that, The Summer I Died 120 times.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So tell me about the bridge. What's so scary about the bridge? Is it like a really narrow bridge?
To get Cape Cod is virtually an island that's separated by the Cape Cod Canal, and there's 2 bridges to get over it, and they're not scary at all. They tend to be very busy, And it's really, I'm not really afraid to go over the bridge. I do it all the time, but I'm not a good city driver. And if
Hmm.
you're born and bred in Cape Cod, anything over the bridge is the city, even though it's
Hmm.
not. The city is Boston. It's still like another hour and something after the bridge, but it was, oh my goodness, I can't drive in Boston. Or, oh my goodness, how am I gonna, what's gonna happen when I drive over the bridge?
Hmm.
But it's not that scary. But the city driving is, yeah.
Oh
So
yeah, well I'm in Toronto, so the traffic here is insane. I was in Montreal in the summer, and everything's under construction, and streets are one way, and then because of construction, they're reversed, and sometimes only half reversed. So you've got cars actually two one ways, like, and where do you go? Like it's
what
just the most ridiculous traffic system I've ever seen.
exactly. Yeah, but I have never been to Toronto, but I am fascinated with Canada. I have been to Montreal and just
Hmm.
last fall went to Niagara Falls in the Canadian side, and it was fabulous. I loved it.
How could you not go to Toronto? You're like 12 minutes away.
Well, I wasn't the driver, and ironically, what happened was my boyfriend's daughter was getting married in upstate New York.
Hmm.
So he decided to extend the weekend to go to Niagara Falls. And the morning of her wedding, when we were heading to New York, I woke up with the worst vertigo I've ever had in my life.
Oh, yeah.
It felt like the worst hangover times 10. I mean, the bed was spinning. I went to bed fine, and it was awful. And it turned out, so I did manage to go to the wedding. I took a COVID test and it was negative. And I did manage to go through the wedding, but most of the wedding, I mean, he's holding me up. Like it was bad. It was awful. And we wound up going to Niagara Falls, and it was still beautiful. We still had a good time, but I was not feeling so good. And as
Yeah,
it turned out, um, vertigo and dizziness is a symptom of MS, which I did not
yeah,
know I had. And it was combined with what turned out to be I did have COVID. I just had a false negative on the early
of
test.
course.
And so the COVID exacerbated the vertigo symptom and just exploded. And it lasted for like 6 weeks. It was awful. But so
Hmm.
it was all I could do. I mean, Niagara Falls was beautiful. And we had all these fun plans for a road trip. You know, I had books on tape for us to laugh at, and we were going to take turns driving and all this great stuff. And yeah, I could barely make it. But nothing since closeness until your boyfriend's seen you puke on the side of the road several times. So we'll do it again, and hopefully I'll
Hmm.
be, completely healthy, and we will get to Toronto because I do want to go for sure.
Yeah, that vertigo is nasty. I had never heard of it, and on one of my medical adventures, I thought my pacemaker failed. I was
Ooh.
having an episode of vertigo, and it was so bad that the doctors in the hospital thought my pacemaker was failing, and they were like scratching their heads, And then a neurologist came in and he said, "Do you mind if I take a look at him?" And then 3 minutes later, he did the like flip me upside down and crank your head around, and it's gone. It was like, it's such a weird affliction.
Yeah, it's awful. And like I said, I was very lucky with the MS diagnosis. I'm pretty stable now, and the breast cancer was horrible and frightening. But I didn't need any radiation. So I don't mean to be glib when I say this, but the vertigo, I dare say, was the worst because it was
Hmm.
so awful. I couldn't do anything, and I just didn't know what it was, how long it was going to
Yeah.
last, was it going to get any better? And those ear exercises they talk about. So me and my boyfriend did that. He tried to guide me through them, and that was another immediate horror show of vomit and just awful.
Yeah.
So, and I'll
Yeah.
tell you, I mean, I have a glass of wine here and there, or drink here and there, but I never want to return to the hangover days of my 20s because I had this vertigo. I don't understand
Hmm.
how I got through it. I mean, yeah, you'll never see me have more than 2 drinks again in my life because I'm just so terrified of that
Hmm.
awful feeling.
I understand that completely. So tell me about your blog. Is it a blog or a vlog? or both?
It's a blog, and it basically takes an aspect of life with MS and then with breast cancer and finds a way to make fun of it. So my most recent one was, at MS moments, times where MS is really scary, but trying to make fun of it too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and during COVID even gave me some blog options too. Like one of the COVID things that my favorite COVID blogs was, I talked about how before COVID, I was an expert on cleanly bathrooms, public restrooms, because I'm also a little bit of a germaphobe too. And it was important to know, like, as I go about my route, where clean bathrooms were. And I posed that maybe I should have started, an app, a service where I could tell people. And I got
Mm-hmm.
into the specifics. Well, this McDonald's is good, but only if you go right after the shift change when the last crew's, like, I got really detailed. So that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I just take an aspect of it and then I multiply it to try to give other people a little giggle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard that it works and it's great. So um, and I'd like to do a shout out to my friend when came up with this idea because there was so much amusing things, not amusing, very frustrating things happening that making fun of them was the only way I could cope. It felt like I was beating up on the MS bully. I got a copy of the National MS Society magazine Momentum, and there was an article about a guy in the Midwest doing the same thing. And my first thought was like, damn it, I can't believe somebody stole my idea and he's already gotten this blog and this is awful and like so much for this idea. What am I going to do now? Well, I took a step back and I read his blog and then I reached out to him and he's fabulous. And so
Mm-hmm.
his humor is different from mine. And so there's room in this for everyone. So his name is Doug Ankerman and his blog
Mm-hmm.
is My Odd Sock. And because he's a guy, his humor is a little different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I just he's began my good friend. So I like to do a little shout out to him. His blog is called My Odd Sock. And if anyone is interested in an MS humor blog, I highly recommend his. As long as you read mine first and accept that mine's better, and then you can go
Mm-hmm.
read Doug's, which is also great.
So do you two cross posts? Like, do you ever make a contribution to his and him to yours?
We haven't, and I don't know why. And that's a really good idea. And maybe I'll have to reach out to him. We cross comment. We usually comment on each other's, and that gets some
Mm-hmm.
discussion going. But I have to pose that to him. What a great idea, Fred. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
again,
That's what I'm here for.
well, and he has MS too, so that fabulous idea might be like, our MS brains not clicking in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but going back to the clean bathroom uh thing, my clean bathroom app. So the point of the app was, hence COVID, everything had changed, right? Now, I drive my mother to doctor's appointment and I can't go in and use that restroom. I'm not allowed in. And so it just threw everything into this whole turmoil. And so I did not create my app. Well, Charmin has. Charmin read my blog and they now have a clean bathroom app where if you're on a road trip, you can type in where you are and they'll give you recommended restrooms, which really bugs me. And I feel like they totally stole that idea.
Yeah. If they were smart, they would sponsor you.
That's a great idea. Maybe I'll reach out to them too. Thank you for all these
Hey,
great
Charmin.
ideas.
I don't know who owns Charmin. Maybe it's Procter and Gamble. Procter and Gamble, some toilet paper company.
Right.
You know, but you've got to I've heard the Taco Bells are really nasty in general. And there's another Mexican, Chipotle sometimes. I've heard that
Really?
can also be quite nasty, but yeah, I don't frequent. I mean, public restrooms are, you know, pretty disgusting in general.
Not low. I was an expert. I knew the ones that, 9 out of 10 times you were going to have an okay experience.
Okay,
And
who's your top three?
top three in clean
Yeah,
restrooms.
yeah.
Um, doctor's offices, of course, but
Okay.
that's the obvious. Burger King actually tends to be good, but again, you got to time it right. Which is funny
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like Burger King's gone downhill in their food
Mm-hmm.
issues. As well as formal rest areas are usually pretty good.
What's a formal rest area?
Like, like something off the Mass Pike or a formal highway that has, a gas
Oh,
station
okay.
and food, and they usually have people regularly going in. And
Yeah, the state run
yeah,
or the
it's
federal. Yeah, because they always have to have someone there going in there on a regular because, like if you watch any TV, that's where the majority of the serial killers hang out. So they've got to you know, swab the crime scene really quickly. Otherwise, nobody will
exactly.
use them.
Exactly. That's so funny. And it's funny that you mentioned Taco Bell because I love Mexican food and there's just not a Taco Bell close to me. And
Mm-hmm.
then I met my boyfriend and he's totally against Taco Bell for the bathroom issue. He says it's just like so bad for you and so now I'm like terrified to go to Taco Bell, even though, I love Mexican.
Mm-hmm. So what did they, when I was in university and they finally put one in on campus, they called it Taco Belch.
Yeah. I can see that.
So sorry, Taco Bell. Don't sue us. We're just having fun.
Right, exactly. Um,
Okay. So now that you have this contract with Black Rose Writing for a new book and you're going to be bigger than J.K. Rowling, what's the new book about?
So the new book is also a memoir, which I feel like when I tell people that, it makes me sound conceited. Like, why is my life so interesting? But and it's not really. It's just how you tell the story. I think is a big part of it. But I grew up in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and it's kind of a little famous. I don't know if any of your listeners know it. It's the tip of Cape Cod, and
Mm-hmm.
it was settled by Portuguese people. So it has a large fishing population, but it's also a beautiful seaside town that's been very open and very welcoming. So and it's tiny. So it's a mix of, Portuguese fishing families, artists, huge artist colony, but also a gay and lesbian colony. The
Oh.
LBGQT welcoming
Mm-hmm.
visiting spot. And it's tourist, it's very seasonal. So it's about growing up there and coming of age in Provincetown. And it's also about my first love, who was a wonderful person with a drug addiction, and which is
Mm-hmm.
why we didn't make it. So yeah, so it's about, growing up in a very unusual small town, and it's called Shelter of the Monument, and it's about how I didn't want to leave, and this person who is totally bad for me helped me find the courage to be able to leave a town that I felt so comfortable in, and did not never wanted to leave, never wanted to find my voice or my own place in this world. And if not for this first love of mine, who was so fabulous, except for this addiction, he helped
Mm-hmm.
me find myself. Um,
That's amazing.
oh,
I
thank
hope he
you.
found himself too.
Well, no, he
Yeah.
no. And I think that's why I wrote it, because in this age of opiate addiction, so I still think there's this idea that I feel like a lot of people in the world thought of him as a lost cause. And I think I wrote this book because I wanted to say, I don't believe that's so. And here's something amazing that this person did for me,
Mm-hmm.
even though he couldn't do these wonderful things for himself.
Yeah. And that's not unusual. I mean, we all have our limits and our challenges and things that we're great at and things that other people see us as being great at and we don't see ourselves as being great at.
Mhm, mhm.
So,
Yes, exactly.
so when
Um,
does the book come out?
its release date is November 16th. I'm very,
Exciting.
yes, it is. Yes, I'm very excited about it. Um, so yeah, and I'll be posting on my blog soon. I'll start talking about that.
And
Yeah.
what is the name of your blog?
It's YvonneDeSousa.com. So it's
Okay.
YvonneDeSousa. So
Wow.
YvonneDeSousa.com.
That's hilarious. How did you come up with that?
I don't know. I don't know. And MS Moment, I had a fabulous web guru who helped me through the whole thing. And in one of my MS moments, and my last name deSousa is a little different for most people because I have cousins who spell it with a capital D. My family spells it with a small d, capital S, but my cousins spell it with a large D, capital S. And it all has to do with when our families came over from Ellis Island. My
Mhm.
father came first, with his sister, and then my uncle came after, and it's how the people at Ellis Island wrote the name out and
Mm-hmm.
Americanized it. And so the blog had been up for a couple of years, and I was posting, and I looked at it and I was like, my web guru spelled my name wrong. I can't believe I didn't catch that. What is wrong? He's so good. How did he do that? So I was ready to fire off an email, and I don't know, something happened. I got distracted, and I came back to fire off this email, and I looked at it again. My name was spelled right. He didn't spell it wrong. I spelled it wrong in my brain in that second.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an MS thing. And so yeah, I just like to, my message is giggles are good for you. And I'd really like people, if they can, to try to remember that as they go about whatever they're suffering, whatever their crisis is. I think a good example is we go to a funeral and we're mourning somebody, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so overwhelming, and the grief is so debilitating. And then someone will get up and talk about the person, and they'll tell a funny story, and you crack up, and it's
Mm-hmm.
healing. Even if it's only healing for a few seconds, I believe that healing lasts and helps you through. um and I know when you're totally down and distressed, laughing is the last thing you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I suggest you try, and if you need help, I mean, there's laughter all around you. Your favorite comedian, sitcoms, old sitcoms. Like we
Yeah.
just lost, Cindy Williams, and it reminds me of Laverne and Shirley. So sometimes I'll go back to those old ones on YouTube, and
Mm-hmm.
YouTube is a great source for laughter. My particular, if I'm really distressed, is dog and baby videos. Those crack me up
Mm-hmm.
every time. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing like dogs doing stand up. There's and to be honest, I don't find most of the current sitcoms very funny. They're
Mhm.
I do go back to YouTube and find the jokes that we shouldn't probably be telling anymore, but those are actually you know, I was just watching Rodney Dangerfield on the Jackie Gleason show,
Oh, right.
and that was just magical to me. So,
Mhm. And I would argue, I think we can get too politically correct, and you don't want anyone to be offended, and you really have to work hard not to do that, because this isn't about making fun of other people. For me, it's about making fun of the illness. But I think there's something to be said about not being politically correct when it's done right, like All in the Family, Archie Bunker, all kinds of wrong. Kind of not the
mm-hmm,
nicest guy ever, but man, does he crack me up sometimes. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, you go back to the Old Testament, and I forget exactly which section it was, but Moses was in the desert leading the Jews out of Egypt, and one of the guys said, like, you there weren't enough graves in Egypt for us to be buried in. You brought us out to the desert, like,
mhm.
you know, that's I guess the first joke. I don't know, maybe.
Well, and it's funny because I open up MS Madness, the book. I really wanted to do a quote from the Bible and a quote from the Rolling Stones because they said the exact same thing. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." So that quote got in there. And the Rolling Stones have a line in Waiting on a Friend that says, "A smile relieves a heart that grieves." So I was
Mm-hmm.
adamant I wanted them both side by side because I think that's funny in itself that the Bible and the Stones are saying the same thing. And maybe Mick and Keith read Proverbs and got it from there. But my self-publisher wouldn't let me. She said it was a copyright issue. Apparently God doesn't have copyright issues, but the Rolling Stones do.
Well, and the funny thing is, the Rolling Stones were around when the Bible was written, so
Right, right. So
you know, and the old joke is that Keith Richards died like 35 years ago. Just nobody's told him yet.
yeah, exactly.
So, well, I'm glad this is you've taken this very negative situation and turned it into a great positive. And I wish you much success with the next book. And you'll have to get yourself on a few more podcasts now that you know how to not decline an invitation. And it'll be great for you, and it'll be great for a lot of people. So, Yvonne, again, how can people get a hold of you if they want to book you for a podcast or whatever?
So my website is the best way. And again, it's yvonne.deSousa.com, and it has a contact link as well as the blog, as well as information about MS Madness, A Giggle More,
Mm-hmm.
Cry Less Story of Multiple Sclerosis, my old memoir. And as soon as I can get through these Black Rose writing edits, I'm going to be posting on there a lot too, stuff about the new book coming up. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yvonne.deSousa.com.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being on. To the audience out there, thank you for joining in. Please like, subscribe, give Yvonne's material a look, and wait for her upcoming book. And I wish you all a wonderful day and see you next episode. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred.
You're very welcome. Bye bye.